On the 7th of April, 1498, the city of Florence gathered in its main square to watch a man walk through fire. This was not a metaphor. 2 long walls of firewood had been built in the center of the square, soaked with oil and resin, leaving a corridor between them about a yard wide. A Dominican friar had agreed to walk down that corridor. A Franciscan had agreed to walk it from the other end. If the Dominican came out alive, then his master, a preacher who for 4 years had effectively governed Florence from a pulpit, was telling the truth about everything. The crowd had been in the square since morning. They were on the rooftops. They were sitting on the tops of walls. There were objections. Could the friar carry a crucifix into the fire? Could he carry the consecrated host? Was his habit blessed? And if it was, wasn't that cheating? Should he change his clothes? Should he be searched? Each question had to be carried between 2 groups of clergy who had stopped speaking directly to one another, and each answer produced a new question. Midday became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. Then it rained. Hard enough to ruin the wood, and hard enough to send. They had come to watch God settle a question. What they had watched instead was 2 religious orders arguing about laundry. Florence had been embarrassed in front of itself, and by the time the square was empty, it had already decided whose fault that was. The next day, a mob came for the convent of San Marco, and the preacher was arrested. 6 weeks later, he was executed in the same square, more or less on the spot where the wood had been stacked. His name was Girolamo Savonarola, and here is the part of this that should interest you. The document that convicted him was not written by his enemies. It was a confession, his own account, his own reasoning, his own explanation of what he had meant and why he had meant it, given in a small room, to a notary with a quill over a period of days. This was a man who had defied a pope. Summoned to Rome, he had not gone. Excommunicated, he had gone on preaching anyway. He had stood against the most powerful institution in Europe and had not given up a sentence of it. And then he sat down and explained himself. I want to know why. So, probably, do you, and I'll tell you in chapter 13, because the answer isn't. Before we get there, we need to be precise about what he actually did. Because it's the thing you do roughly 4 times a day. He explained. Explaining is not the opposite of lying. That's the confusion at the center of this, and it's why intelligent people walk into it. You can be completely, scrupulously truthful and still destroy yourself by explaining. And most people who do it are being truthful. That's exactly why they never see it coming. It doesn't feel like a risk. It feels like integrity. Here's the mechanism. When you state something, it is a fact about you. When you explain it, you produce a document, a structured account with reasons, causes, motives, and a sequence of events. Facts are difficult to use. Documents are easy to use. A document can be quoted, condensed, forwarded, edited, and read aloud in a room you are not in, 8 months later, by somebody who wants something from the situation. And you can't take it back. Once you have explained yourself to a person, the explanation is theirs, not shared with them, theirs. They own the copy, they choose who reads it, and they decide which parts of it matter. There's a tell for this, and once you know it, you'll catch yourself 2 or 3 times a week. It's the unprompted sentence that begins the reason I offered to someone who did not ask, in a slightly faster voice than the one you were using a moment ago. That acceleration is the sound of a person building a case. Nobody builds a case unless they've already accepted, somewhere below the level of thought, that a verdict is coming. So, 10 things that should never be explained. Not lied about, not denied, not hidden, not evaded. Simply stated, or not stated, and then left alone. That distinction will feel thin for about 4 minutes, and then it will feel enormous. One warning first, because I don't want this misapplied. This is not an argument for becoming secretive with people who love you. Concealment as a personality is a miserable way to live, and it makes you strange rather than a refusal is a position. The reason for a refusal is a target. Say no, and the other person has to deal with a fact. Say no because the month is full, because the budget's committed, because your brother is visiting, and you have handed them a list of conditions, every one of which they can now dismantle. The month can be rearranged, the budget can be found. Your brother, it turns out, is welcome to come too. You have converted a decision into a negotiation, and you did it yourself, out of politeness. Watch what happens next, because it's the same every time. They don't argue with the no, they argue with the because. And each reason you're forced to defend makes you look less like someone who declined and more like someone holding out for better terms. When you eventually hold firm with no reason left to give, they conclude, correctly, that the reasons were never the point. Now you look evasive, and you got there by being forthcoming. Savonarola was summoned to Rome in 1495 and did not go. That was a defensible position. Plenty of men ignored a summons. But he didn't leave it as a position. He wrote. He explained his health, the danger of the roads, his obligations to Florence, the state of his conscience. Each letter became an object in Rome that could be laid beside the previous letter and checked for inconsistency. They were. Silence would have been a wall. What he built instead was a door with a lock on it, and a lock is a thing people work on. It's worse in writing, because writing invites revision. The 4-line apologetic email declining an invitation is a document with 4 separate handles on it, and the person replying will take hold of whichever one is loosest. Watch how the reply always opens. Totally understand about the budget, but there's a rough law here, and it's counterintuitive enough to be worth stating flatly. The longer the refusal, the less it is believed. Length reads as discomfort. Discomfort reads as uncertainty, and uncertainty is an invitation. The most convincing no you will ever give is the shortest one you can bear to say. You can be warm about this. Warmth belongs in the tone, not in the content. Money, specifically. What you earned, what you've saved, what you inherited, what you paid for the thing on your wrist. Cosimo de' Medici ran the richest bank in Europe and kept a libro segreto, a secret ledger, held apart from the books his clerks and junior partners worked from. Not because the visible books were false, because the true shape of what he had was itself a weapon. And the first thing anyone with a claim on him needed was the number. Money known is money claimed. Every figure you disclose gets converted by somebody into an expectation. What you could lend, what you could absorb, what you ought to have contributed, what you clearly don't need. And it never converts in your favor. Nobody has ever heard your number and revised their estimate of what you owe them downward. The second effect is worse and slower. A disclosed number becomes a fixed point that your behavior is measured against permanently. Every subsequent decision gets audited against it. You will be generous, and it will be recorded as insufficient. You will decline something, and it will be remembered as a lie. You have given people a constant, and people do arithmetic with constants. Notice also that the exchange is never symmetrical. When you disclose a number, you learn nothing whatsoever. The other person learns something permanent. There is no version of this trade in which you come out ahead, which is why every negotiator in every field is taught the same reflex. Whoever names the figure first has conceded the frame. In a salary conversation, the entire contest is over one question. Will you state what you currently earn? And the answer always is that you'd rather talk about the value of the role. And it runs the other way too, which is useful. When somebody volunteers their numbers to you unprompted, they are almost never confiding. They are establishing a position, a claim of standing, a bid for sympathy, or the opening move of a request that will arrive in about a fortnight. Note who asks as well. The question is almost an announced intention is a move your opponent gets to see before you make it. The trial by fire is the cleanest example in European history, so let's use it properly. The proof was announced. That announcement created a date. The date handed every opponent in Florence a fixed window in which to prepare objections. And objections, note, not counter-arguments. Nobody had to prove Savonarola wrong. They only had to make sure that on the day nothing happened. And nothing did. That's the crucial thing. He didn't lose a debate. He suffered a non-event, a city that turned up expecting a resolution and went home wet, having watched a procedural argument about a friar's clothing. His authority didn't lose. It simply failed to arrive, in public, on a day it had promised to. Look at the structure, because it's general. The danger did not live in the plan. It lived in the gap between announcing the plan and delivering it. And the length of that gap is exactly how much time you've given everyone else to prepare. This is why people who tell you about the business they're starting, the book they're writing, or the conversation they're finally going to have, so often never do it. Two things are happening to them at once. The first is internal. Describing the plan out loud pays out a portion of the satisfaction in advance. You get the look on the listener's face, the respect, the encouragement, before you've done anything, and the pressure that was going to make you act quietly drains away. You have been paid for work not yet performed, and nobody works hard for money they've already received. The second is external, and it's the one that actually costs you. You have handed everybody with a stake in the current arrangement a schedule, not an argument to beat which they might lose, just a date to be ready for. And being ready is much easier than being right. There's one real exception, and it's worth naming so you don't over-apply this. Telling a person who has no stake in the outcome and no capacity to intervene, a friend in another industry, someone who simply expects you at the gym on Tuesday, is a commitment device, and commitment devices work. The rule isn't secrecy. The rule is never. Seneca, writing on benefits, made the observation that a favor is destroyed by the reminder of it. 2,000 years later, it's still the single most broken rule on this list. A favor is a strange kind of asset. Unmentioned, it accrues. It sits in the other person as a quiet, unresolved obligation. And quiet, unresolved obligations are the most durable form of influence there is, precisely because no one has agreed on their size. The moment you explain it, even lightly, even as a joke, even generously, you convert it into an invoice. And invoices get paid. That's the trap. Once it's settled, they owe you nothing. The debt was cancelled the moment it was mentioned. There's a second effect underneath. Gratitude is an uncomfortable thing to carry, and people are quietly looking for a reason to put it down. Explaining the favor gives them one. Now they get to be irritated with you instead of indebted to you. And irritation is a far more comfortable emotion to hold for years. There's a variant that's worse than saying it to their face, and it's the more common one, explaining the favor to somebody else. I'm the one who got him that job. You've said it in a room he isn't in, to people who like him, and it will reach him. It always reaches him, stripped of your tone and shorn of whatever affection you said it with. What arrives is a bare claim of ownership over his career. You have converted a private asset into a public insult, and you did it while feeling rather good about yourself. And the version people actually fall into is not boastful. That's what makes it hard to spot. It's defensive. Someone questions your commitment, or your fairness, or how much you've contributed, and you reach for the favor as evidence of good character. Perfectly natural. You have just spent a permanent asset to win a temporary argument that nobody will remember. Do favors as though you intend to forget them. This one is about explaining a third person to a second person. Look, the reason he's like that is you will feel generous while you do it. You're providing context, diffusing attention, helping two people understand each other. It's genuinely well meant almost every time. What you're demonstrating is that you carry information between rooms. Nobody who watches you do this thinks how thoughtful. They think immediately and without deciding to, what does he say about me? And there is no way to answer that question afterwards, because the demonstration already was the answer. Florence, in the decade we're discussing, ran on exactly this instinct at civic scale. The city maintained boxes in which anonymous accusations about your neighbors could be deposited, the tamburi. They were used constantly against enemies, rivals, business competitors, and people whose houses somebody wanted. A society that rewards explaining other people produces a lot of paper and very little trust. And Florence, in the 1490s, had both problems at once. The personal version is smaller, but the mechanism is identical. Every time you explain one person to another, you make yourself slightly less safe to both. This also gives you one of the most reliable diagnostics you will ever have, and it costs nothing to run. Anyone who explains a third person to you in detail, their marriage, their finances, their reasons, their failures, has just shown you precisely what they will do with you, in some other room, on some other evening. Not might do, does. You are watching a demonstration of a habit, and you happen to be sitting on the flattering side of it this time. None of this requires you to be unhelpful when two people genuinely are at cross purposes. It requires one substitution. Talk about the situation, not the person. The deadline was impossible. The brief changed twice. Nobody was told. That diffuses exactly as well, and it doesn't require you to have opened anyone's file. You are not the narrator of what you can't afford, what you couldn't tolerate, the point at which you'd walk, break, or quit. In any negotiation, this is the whole contest. A limit that has been stated will be tested, then approached, then treated as the new normal. State that you can't go past a number, and the number becomes the destination. Say you'd never accept a particular arrangement, and you've told the other side precisely how much room they have before you actually resist, which is a piece of information you gave away for free while feeling firm. Lorenzo de' Medici spent years concealing how ill he was. The gout ran in the family, it was agonizing, and it was progressive, and he conducted diplomacy from a bed on days when he couldn't stand. Rome, Milan, and Naples all had an urgent interest in knowing how long Florence's ruler had left, because that number changes what you're prepared to sign and what you're prepared to wait out. Your health belongs in this category. So does the floor under your finances, your appetite for a fight, and the amount of unpleasantness you'll absorb before you leave. Same rule, same reason. And it applies at home as much as at work, which is the part people resist. Telling someone what you would never tolerate does not build a fence. It draws a map with a distance marked on it, and everything up to that line has now been quietly reclassified as acceptable. You meant it as a warning. It was received as a permission. The ratchet only turns one way too. Nobody has ever announced a limit and then found that people treated it as further away than it was. Every stated boundary either holds exactly where it was stated or moves inward under pressure. So the number you say out loud is, at best, the most generous version of you that will ever exist. A limit nobody has. Changing your mind is a strength. Explaining the change is where people lose. Because there are only two available explanations, and both cost you something. Either the new position is better, in which case You have just testified that your previous judgment was poor. Or something changed, in which case you have just told everybody which pressures move you. The second is the expensive one. An explained reversal is a map of your levers. Do it twice, and people stop engaging with your positions altogether and start applying whatever it was that worked last time. You've published the method. Savonarola signed a confession, retracted it, and signed again. Each of those movements, on its own, is a completely human thing that a man under enormous pressure does. But they were written down in sequence, with reasons attached, and read in order. They no longer looked human. They looked unstable. Instability is the one quality a man claiming to speak with divine authority cannot survive being seen to have. The everyday version is a meeting. You held a view in March, you hold a different one in June, and you open with a full account of the journey, the data that shifted, the conversation that persuaded you, the thing you hadn't considered. It reads as intellectual honesty, and it feels excellent. What the room has actually taken away is a working procedure for moving you, and one of the people in it will use it before the quarter is out. Notice, too, who demands the explanation. The person pressing hardest for why you changed your mind is very often the person who intends to change it back and is gathering the specification. Someone who simply accepts the new position and moves on has no such project. "I've changed my mind" is a complete statement. Deliver the new position with exactly the same flatness you used for the old one, and let people adjust in silence. They will, not fear in the abstract, the specific thing, the job, the house, the relationship, the standing in the room. Grievance belongs here too, because grievance is how this one usually escapes. Somebody who feels wronged wants the wrong understood. That's the whole appeal of telling it, and it's a completely reasonable want. But a grievance explained in full is a precise description of your soft place. Anybody listening now knows what to threaten, what to offer, and what to take away. In 1478, the Pazzi family conspired to murder Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother. Their grievances were real and they were thoroughly public. The papal banking account, an inheritance blocked by a law that looked tailored to them. Systematic exclusion from the offices their standing warranted. Anyone in Florence could have listed them, which is exactly why, when a conspiracy was being assembled, the Pazzi weren't merely available. They were obvious. That is the true cost of a well-known grievance. It doesn't get you redress, it gets you recruited by people who need someone with a motive and who have taken the trouble to find out who already has one. And the objection people raise here is always the same. But they were sympathetic. They probably were. Sympathy is real and it's usually sincere. It is also the shortest-lived thing in the room. The sympathy lasts a fortnight. The information that you cannot afford to lose this, that this is the thing you'd fold on, lasts as long as they know you, survives their goodwill, survives the friendship, and is still sitting there intact on the day your interests finally diverge. Nobody has to be malicious for that to cost you. They only have to remember. The people who can actually help you with a fear are almost your ambition, the room you intend to be in 5 years. There are 2 failure modes here, and you don't get to choose which one you get. A small ambition, explained, gets you managed. Somebody slots you neatly into their plan, and you will find it very comfortable and very final. A large ambition, explained, gets you resisted, because people who would happily assist a colleague will not assist a rival, and you have just told them which one you are. Piero de' Medici inherited his father's position in 1492, at 20, and never understood that the power he'd been handed had always been exercised quietly. Lorenzo held Florence for over 20 years through networks, favors, marriages, and appointments that were never once described out loud in a city that maintained the fiction of being a republic. Piero made it explicit. He behaved like a prince, and when the French crossed the Alps in 1494, he went out to negotiate personally, surrendered the fortresses, Sarzana, Pietrasanta, and the ports, and came back to announce the outcome as his own decision. Florence expelled him within days. His father had held the identical power for 2 decades by never naming it. The modern shape of this is entirely predictable once you see the 2 failure modes. Explain your ambition to someone above you, and you become a retention problem. A person to be kept comfortable, given the title without the remit, managed in place. Explain it to a peer, and you've started a race that neither of you had agreed to run, against someone who now has every reason to be slightly slower at answering your emails. There's a rule of thumb that survives most situations. Describe the work, never the destination. I want to get good at this is safe, true, and costs nothing, because it threatens nobody's position. I want your job in 3 years is the same information with a target painted on it. Be underestimated on the way there. Be the whole of it. Why you are the way you are. Your reasoning, your history, your character. This is the one everybody does, because it's the one that feels like intimacy. It isn't. Intimacy is being known slowly by people who watch what you do over years. An explanation is an attempt to skip to the end of that process, and skipping is why you arrive somewhere else. 2 costs. The first, you are handing someone a version of yourself that you assembled while anxious about their opinion. It will be wrong in the specific way anxiety makes things wrong. Too apologetic, too tidy, over-justified, with the awkward parts either buried or absurdly overweighted. And it will stick because it came from you and therefore counts as authoritative. You have written the summary that everyone else will use. The second cost is the real one, and it's structural rather than practical. The act of explaining concedes the point. You have agreed that your existence requires justification and that this particular person is qualified to receive it. Nothing you say afterwards can undo that, because the frame was fixed the moment you started. And the frame, not the content, is what people remember. You'll recognize the settings, the interview where you narrate the whole shape of your career, including the gap and what it meant. The second date, where you explain, unprompted, why the last one ended and what you've learned. The apology that stops being an apology at about the 3rd sentence and becomes an account of your childhood. Every one of them is well-intentioned, and every one of them hands over a document written under pressure by an author who wanted very badly to be liked. And here is the test that settles it. The people who are actually worth being known by will not require the document. They'll watch what you do for 2 years and reach conclusions you didn't have to supply. And those conclusions will be more accurate and far more durable than anything you could have written about yourself in an anxious hour. The people who demand the explanation up front are asking for a shortcut for their own convenience so they can file you and move on. So, why did he explain? The man holding the quill was a notary named Ser Francesco di Ser Barone, known throughout Florence as Ser Ceccone. And here is the detail that matters. In the good years, he had been a follower. He had listened to the sermons. He was, in that room, a familiar face. And he was the man given the job of writing everything down. That changes the picture you probably had. Not a dungeon full of strangers. A small room, a table, a candle, someone he knew, and days of patient questions. He was tortured. That's documented, and I'm not going to pretend the confession was freely given. But understand what torture actually produces. Noise, fragments, contradictions, whatever the man believes will make it stop. What came out of that room was not noise. It was coherent, reasoned, sequential, with motives attached, and a narrative that held together well enough to be printed. That takes cooperation. Somewhere in those days, he stopped resisting and started explaining. And the reason he did it is the same reason anyone does. He was persuaded that it would help, that being understood would be better than being opaque, that if they could only see his reasoning, they would see he had meant well, that the true version, told properly and in his own words, would be more survivable than silence. Then the document left the room. It was edited. Men who saw it said so at the time, and the discrepancies were noticed by people in a position to notice. It was printed. It was circulated. And Florence read a Savonarola who had been constructed for a purpose, out of material he had supplied himself. There was no other version of him left to argue with. He had provided the only one, and then he had been hanged, so he couldn't dispute the final draft. That mechanism has nothing to do with the 15th century. Explaining feels like control. You're supplying the context. You're framing it correctly, getting ahead of the misunderstanding, making sure it's understood the right way. But you are not framing anything. You are producing raw material and handing it to an editor. And what gets read, eventually, in a room you're not in, is never what you said. It's whatever your words could be made to support. Silence has no such property. Silence cannot. So the rule is not, tell no one anything. That's the advice of people who've read the title and not the argument. The rule is, state, don't explain. Give people your positions and your actions. Those are finished things and they're yours. Withhold the reasoning because reasoning is unfinished, and unfinished things belong to whoever is holding them next. You will be misunderstood sometimes. Take that as the price, because the alternative was never being understood. It was being documented. Say the thing, then stop talking.